In a galaxy filled with many different civilizations, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, one thing was clear: power was everything. The larger, stronger species ruled the stars, and the smaller, weaker races had to either fit in or fade away. Among these lesser civilizations was the Vasari, a race of beings who were peaceful, intellectual, and fragile. Their bodies were weak, their technology outdated, and they had no military force to defend themselves. Because of this, they were often ignored or rejected by the great galactic empires. No one cared for the Vasari, and no one cared to help them. For centuries, the Vasari lived on their home planet, a quiet world that once teemed with life and knowledge. But now, their home was slowly dying. The planet's resources were running out, and the very ground they walked on was becoming unstable. No matter how much they begged for help, no one offered a hand. The Vasari had become a race of forgotten people, lost to time and space. Then, one day, the Zendari Dominion, a powerful empire that controlled much of the galaxy, made it clear that the Vasari would not survive in their space. The Dominion issued an order: anyone who helped the Vasari would face punishment. They declared the Vasari to be a burden and a threat, and soon, the small race found themselves completely alone. The Vasari's once thriving population was now scattered across the galaxy, searching for refuge, but everywhere they went, doors were closed. Every civilization they encountered rejected them, and soon they had no place left to go. At the same time, a new power was rising: humanity. Humans had always been considered wild and unpredictable. Unlike the more advanced civilizations, humans didn't care for politics or the unspoken rules of the galaxy. They fought their battles with passion and strength, never backing down from a challenge. The galactic powers dismissed humans as an unimportant species, too chaotic to be a true threat. They were outcasts, and many believed they would remain that way forever. But humanity had other plans. The humans, led by Captain Ilias Voss, a veteran of many battles, had long watched the galaxy's treatment of the Vasari. They saw how the Vasari were mistreated and abandoned by everyone they had once trusted. Captain Voss was different from most leaders. He didn't care about what the galaxy thought or how other species judged humanity. He cared about what was right. He believed that no race, no matter how weak or small, should be left to die. And that's exactly what the Vasari were facing: death. Despite the risks, Captain Voss made a decision that would change everything. He ordered his fleet to find the Vasari, protect them, and give them a place to live. Humanity would stand by the Vasari, even if it meant going against the entire galaxy. The decision shocked many in the human ranks, but Voss was certain it was the right choice. He believed that the true strength of a civilization wasn't in its power or its weapons, but in its heart and compassion. And humanity, despite being outcasts, had more heart than anyone could imagine. It wasn't long before the humans found the Vasari. They had scattered themselves across several remote planets, living in fear of being found. Captain Voss knew that if they were going to help them, they needed to act quickly. His fleet arrived just in time, as a Zendari fleet was preparing to wipe out the last of the Vasari survivors. The humans intervened, driving the Zendari ships away with swift, unpredictable attacks. The Vasari, shocked by the sudden rescue, couldn't believe that someone was finally standing up for them. "Why are you helping us?" one of the Vasari leaders asked Captain Voss, his voice trembling. "We are nothing. The galaxy has turned its back on us. Why would you risk everything for us?" Captain Voss looked at the Vasari, his face serious. "Because," he said, his voice steady, "no one else will. You may not be strong, but you are not alone anymore. Humanity will protect you." The Vasari were still unsure, but they had no other choice. With nowhere else to go, they agreed to join the humans, unsure of what the future would hold. As the human fleet carried the Vasari to a safe haven, Captain Voss made a vow: humanity would not allow the Vasari to be forgotten. He would protect them, no matter the cost. because he knew that the galaxy would soon see just how strong humanity could be. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Resolute, watching as the Vezari ships followed in a steady line behind his fleet. Their ships were fragile, their design simple, but for the first time in a long while, they were safe. The human fleet had successfully escorted them to Fortress Haven, a remote colony on the outskirts of human space. It was a peaceful place, far from the center of galactic conflict, and Voss believed it would be the perfect refuge for the Vezari. As the Vezari ships docked and their people disembarked, there was a sense of wonder mixed with fear in their eyes. They had been through so much, rejected by every civilization, chased from one planet to the next, now suddenly offered sanctuary by the humans. It was almost too good to be true. The Vezari weren't used to kindness. They were used to rejection and indifference. "We're safe now," one of the Vezari elders whispered as she stepped onto the colony soil. But for how long? The Vezari had no military forces, no weapons to protect themselves. They were a people of thinkers, not fighters. They had never needed to fight before, living in peaceful isolation for centuries. Now, they found themselves at the mercy of a galaxy that had already shown them its true face. But Captain Voss was determined to change that. Humanity, despite its reputation, had an extraordinary ability to adapt and fight for those who couldn't protect themselves. The humans weren't just here to provide a place to hide. They were here to help the Vezari rebuild, to teach them how to survive in a galaxy that had no place for the weak. The Vezari, though grateful, were cautious. They still couldn't understand why humanity would risk so much for them. Chief Strategist Selen, one of the highest-ranking members of the Vezari, approached Captain Voss with a concerned look. "Captain," she said softly, "I must ask, why? Why are you doing this? There's no benefit for your people. You risk everything to help us. What do you gain from this?" Captain Voss turned to her, his face serious yet kind. "We do it because it's the right thing to do. Your race may be different from ours, but that doesn't make you any less worthy of protection. You don't need to understand it. You just need to know that we'll be here for you." Selen paused, her thoughts heavy. She had spent most of her life studying the stars, trying to understand the nature of the universe, but she had never encountered anything like humanity's willingness to help. The Vezari had always been alone, isolated, and in their weakness, they had come to accept that nothing could be done to change their fate. Now, standing in front of Captain Voss, she realized that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As days passed, Captain Voss and his officers began to integrate the Vezari into human life on Fortress Haven. The human soldiers, many of them veterans of hard-fought battles, trained the Vezari in basic self-defense and survival tactics. It wasn't easy. The Vezari were not built for combat. They struggled to lift the heavier weapons, fumbled through drills, and grew frustrated with their lack of progress. But the humans were patient, teaching them not just to fight, but to believe in themselves. "You don't need to become soldiers," Captain Voss told them during one training session, "but you do need to be ready. The galaxy isn't kind to those who can't defend themselves. We're giving you the tools, but you have to have the will to survive." The Vezari, though skeptical, began to show signs of improvement. They were learning, slowly but surely. They began to see the value in standing up for themselves, even if it meant facing an unknown future. But the galaxy was not done with them yet. Back in the heart of the Zendari Dominion, news of the Vezari's rescue spread quickly. The Dominion had already warned the humans that helping the Vezari would have consequences. They had made it clear that the Vezari were a burden to the galaxy, and any attempt to protect them would be met with force. The Zendari had never been one to back down from a challenge, and they saw humanity's actions as a direct insult to their power. "Let them have their refuge for now," said Supreme Commander Rixar, the leader of the Zendari, as he stared at the latest intelligence reports. "But we will not allow this to continue. The humans are defying us. They must pay the price." Rixar's eyes narrowed. He knew that a full-scale assault on humanity's territory would be a gamble. But the Zendari were not afraid to take risks. The Vasari were not their problem anymore, but humanity. Humanity was a problem, and they would make sure humanity understood that. As tensions in the galaxy grew, the Vasari remained unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their peaceful refuge. For now, they were safe, surrounded by the protection of the humans who had promised them a future. But how long would it last? And when the inevitable conflict came, would the Vasari be ready to stand alongside the humans who had saved them? Captain Voss watched the stars from his command center, knowing that the peace they had fought for was fragile. But he would not back down. Not now, not ever. The Vasari had a place in the galaxy, and he would make sure that they, and humanity, would be the ones to decide what their future would be. The days on Fortress Haven had started to blend together for Captain Elias Voss. His crew had worked tirelessly to ensure the Vasari were safe and prepared for whatever might come. The peaceful world, once thought of as a remote outpost, had now become the center of a brewing storm. The calm that the Vasari had so desperately needed was about to be shattered. The human colony, though small, had grown in importance. It was now home to not only the Vasari but also a growing number of humans who had rallied behind Captain Voss's vision of a galaxy where the weak were protected. On the surface, it seemed like a simple mission of mercy, but Voss knew better. The galaxy was unforgiving, and there was no telling how long their safety would last. He sat in his quarters, looking over a map of the galaxy. The Zendari Dominion, the mighty empire that controlled vast swaths of space, was not one to let such an act of defiance slide. The reports of their displeasure had started trickling in, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Voss's mind raced as he thought about the future. He had been a soldier long enough to know that the Zendari wouldn't rest until they had crushed this small rebellion. Meanwhile, the Vasari continued to settle into their new home. Their people, once broken and divided, were beginning to rebuild. Captain Voss had given them the tools to protect themselves, but the journey was far from over. It wasn't just about physical defense. The Vasari had lived their entire lives as a peaceful, intellectual race. The thought of fighting, of taking up arms against a foe, was foreign to them. Selen, the chief strategist of the Vasari, had been working closely with human officers to understand the basics of defense. She had never imagined she would need such knowledge. Yet here she was, standing in a dimly lit training room, struggling to lift a simple human blaster. "You're doing well," said Sergeant Harper, a tough but kind human soldier who had taken it upon himself to train the Vasari. His voice was encouraging, but Selen could see the worry behind his eyes. The training was difficult, but even more challenging was the uncertainty of what was to come. "I don't know if I can do this," Selen admitted, her voice filled with frustration. "Our people have never fought. We were never meant for this." Harper nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "You don't have to be a soldier to survive, but you do need to learn how to protect what matters most." Though Selen still struggled with the physical aspects of training, there was a shift in her mindset. Slowly, she began to understand that survival was not about fighting for dominance. It was about protecting those you loved, those who depended on you. Back on the command deck of the Resolute, Captain Voss received an urgent report. The Zendari had mobilized. Their ships were moving, and their fleet was large. It was clear now that the Zendari were not just angry, they were preparing for war. "We can't run from this," Voss muttered, his hands clenched around the console. "We knew this day would come." His mind quickly raced through his options. Fortress Haven was small, far from the heart of human space, and its defenses were nothing compared to the might of the Zendari. But Voss wasn't one to back down. He had made a promise to the Vasari, and he would keep it. He immediately began coordinating with his officers, preparing the colony and the Vasari for the coming assault. The humans would stand by their new allies, no matter what. Hours later, the first Zendari ships arrived at the edge of human space. Their warships, sleek and menacing, cast a long shadow over the small colony. It wasn't a full invasion yet, but the message was clear. The Zendari had come to deliver their judgment. Voss stood at the helm of his ship, facing the threat head-on. "Prepare for defensive maneuvers," he ordered. "We'll make them regret underestimating us." The human fleet was smaller but faster. The Vezeri ships, fragile and untested, had no chance of standing up to the Zendari in open combat, but Voss knew the strength of his people. Humans were unpredictable, resourceful, and relentless when cornered. The Zendari might have superior numbers, but they didn't know the human spirit. "Captain," Selen's voice came over the comms, "the Vezeri are ready to fight. We may not be soldiers, but we will not run." Voss's heart swelled with pride. The Vezeri, once fearful and lost, were now standing with humanity, ready to defend their new home. "I never doubted you," he replied. The tension in the air was thick as the Zendari fleet approached. Captain Voss gave a final order, and the human ships jumped into action, using the small, narrow paths between asteroids to set up a defensive perimeter around the Vezeri fleet. "Let's show them what we're made of," Voss said, his voice calm but fierce. As the battle began, the humans fought with everything they had. They used the terrain to their advantage, outmaneuvering the Zendari ships in ways that no one had expected. The Vezeri, though inexperienced, fought with newfound determination, supporting the humans in ways they had never imagined. For the first time in centuries, the Vezeri felt something they thought was lost forever: hope. And that hope was not just their own, but shared with those who had stood by them in their darkest hour. The hum of the ship's engines echoed through the command deck of the Resolute as Captain Elias Voss stood at the helm, watching the vast void of space unfold before him. The Zendari fleet was closing in fast, their warships moving with deadly precision. Every second that passed made the tension grow thicker. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. It would be a fight for survival. "Captain, the Zendari fleet has entered our range," reported Lieutenant Rivera, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "They're forming a blockade around Fortress Haven. They're not giving us any options." Voss stared out at the incoming threat, his mind sharp and focused. The Zendari had made their intentions clear. They were here to destroy the sanctuary humanity had given to the Vezeri. They believed the Vezeri to be weak, an easy target, and humanity's decision to protect them was an affront to the Zendari's authority. "We don't have much time," Voss said, his voice calm but with a hard edge. "Prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers. We'll fight them with everything we got." As the Resolute and its fleet began to move into position, Voss couldn't help but glance back at the Vezeri ships, now anchored in the protective perimeter around Fortress Haven. They weren't fighters by nature, and their ships were fragile compared to the might of the Zendari warships. But they had something the Zendari didn't: the determination to stand side by side with their human allies. "Selen," Captain Voss said into the comms, his voice clear. "We're not expecting you to fight like soldiers, but I need you to be ready. Help where you can, and if the situation becomes critical, don't hesitate to activate the defense systems we've installed on your ships." Selen's voice came through, firm and confident. "Understood, Captain. We will protect Haven." Voss turned to his tactical officer, Commander Holt, who was already working furiously at his station. "Status on enemy ships." The screen flickered, and Holt's fingers danced across the console, quickly bringing up the enemy fleet's details. "The Zendari have 2 flagship cruisers and an entire fleet of destroyers. We're outnumbered at least 3-1, but their ships are slow in the asteroid field. We can use that to our advantage. Then we'll make them regret thinking they can intimidate us," Voss replied. "Coordinate with the fleet. We'll split them into 2 teams. One team will engage the Zendari head-on, while the other takes a more indirect route. We'll draw their fire and give our allies a chance to fight back." The battle began with a deafening roar as the Resolute fired its first salvo, the massive cannons shaking the ship. The human fleet engaged the Zendari with everything they had, using their smaller, faster ships to dart around the larger, slower Zendari warships. The asteroid field created a natural barrier, offering cover from the Zendari's heavy fire. But despite their tactics, the Zendari were relentless. Their ships fired with precision, their weapons tearing through human shields and causing explosions that rocked the human vessels. The human fleet fought back fiercely, but they were facing an overwhelming force. "We need to hold them off just a little longer," Voss said. His eyes narrowed. "Every second counts. The Vezari must be ready." Meanwhile, on the Vezari ships, Selen paced back and forth, her mind focused on the battle unfolding outside. She wasn't a soldier, but she had learned the basics. She had learned how to defend her people, and now she had to put that knowledge into action. "We can't let them fall," Selen whispered to herself as she watched the distant explosions and the blinding flashes of energy beams. "We owe them everything." The Vezari, though inexperienced, had become determined. They activated their ship's defense systems, using the few weapons they had to shield themselves from the Zendari's fire. It was a desperate defense, but it was a defense nonetheless. They were learning to fight, to protect their new home and their new allies. Back on the Resolute, Captain Voss watched as the Zendari ships began to close in, their guns firing in waves. It was clear they were targeting the human ships first, hoping to eliminate the primary threat before dealing with the Vezari. But Voss was ready for this. He had expected it. "Deploy the secondary shields," Voss commanded, his voice unwavering. "All ships, brace for impact." The shields activated just in time, absorbing the full brunt of a Zendari laser blast. The Resolute shook violently, but the crew held firm. Voss's jaw clenched. The Zendari were testing their resolve, but he knew that the humans had the heart to fight back. The time had come to give everything they had. As the battle raged on, the Vezari continued to defend their ships with greater skill and confidence. The cooperation between the two races was becoming more evident with every passing moment. The humans fought as a united front, and the Vezari, though still learning, were adapting quickly. The Zendari fleet began to feel the pressure. Their ships were being forced to divide their attention, and slowly but surely the human fleet was making a dent in their numbers. But the Zendari were not a race to be underestimated. They would not give up easily. Captain Voss's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold. It was a fierce fight, but there was no turning back now. If humanity could hold on just a little longer, they might just win. The fate of the Vezari and of Fortress Haven rested on their shoulders. The battle for Fortress Haven was far from over, and Captain Elias Voss could feel the weight of every second as the Zendari fleet continued to press their assault. The Resolute rocked under heavy fire, and the smaller human ships fought desperately, using every trick they had learned to outmaneuver the Zendari's larger, more powerful warships. On the command deck, the crew moved with practiced precision, each person focused on their role. Voss could feel the tension in the air, the sense of urgency thickening with every passing moment. Their defensive perimeter was holding, just barely. But the Zendari were relentless. Their fleet seemed endless, and no matter how many ships the humans destroyed, more came to take their place. "Captain, we've lost 2 more cruisers," Lieutenant Rivera reported, her face grim. "We're down to half our fighting force, and the Zendari are starting to focus on us more than the Vezari." Voss's heart sank, but he didn't let the weight of the situation show. "We knew this would be a hard fight," he said firmly, his voice strong despite the mounting pressure. "We're not backing down now." His thoughts briefly turned to the Vezari. They had been under his protection, but their ships were no match for the Zendari warships. They had fought bravely, but their inexperience had been evident. The Vezari were not soldiers. They were peaceful explorers, thinkers, and artists. The thought of them being forced into battle broke Voss's heart, but he knew it was their only chance. On the Vezari ships, Selen was at the front lines with her people. The sight of the Zendari warships, their vast, imposing size, sent a chill through her. Yet there was something stirring in her, something she hadn't expected. a sense of purpose. "We can't let them win," she said quietly to herself, watching the human ships dart through the asteroid fields, each move calculated and precise. Despite their initial fear, the Vasari were beginning to understand the importance of this battle. Their people's survival, and the survival of the humans they had come to call allies, depended on it. "Activate the shields," Selen ordered her crew, her voice filled with newfound confidence. "And prepare the defense weapons. Let's show them we're not helpless." As the shields flickered to life, Selen felt a surge of hope. They were not powerless. They were not alone. The Vasari ships began to fire. Each shot a small but defiant act of resistance against the overwhelming power of the Zendari. Back on the Resolute, Voss was beginning to see a small change in the tide of the battle. The Zendari fleet, though still a formidable force, seemed to be slowing down. It wasn't a complete shift, but it was enough to spark a glimmer of hope. "Commander Holt, status on enemy forces?" Voss asked, his eyes locked on the screen as enemy ships continued to close in. "We've taken out 3 more Zendari ships, Captain," Holt replied, his voice showing the first signs of optimism in hours. "Their fleet is starting to break up. They're getting more desperate, trying to focus on our weakest ships." Voss nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Keep them on their toes. We can't let them recover." The human fleet, though battered, had been fighting with fierce determination. Their ships, though not as powerful as the Zendaris, were smaller and faster, and the humans had used that to their advantage. They were unpredictable, constantly shifting tactics, and it was starting to frustrate the Zendari commanders. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. In the midst of the chaos, the Vasari ships had managed to break free from their defensive position, launching a counterattack against the Zendari destroyers that had been pressing too closely to their fleet. They were small and fragile compared to their enemies, but the Vasari weren't backing down. The Zendari didn't expect this. The Vasari, who had been so hesitant, now fought with everything they had. Their ships darted through the asteroid field, targeting the Zendari destroyers with surprising accuracy. They weren't just defending anymore, they were attacking. Selen's voice came through the comms, her words filled with both pride and determination. "We're not going to let you fight this battle alone, Captain. We got your back." Voss couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. The Vasari were no longer just refugees. They were warriors, fighting side by side with their human allies. And together, they were holding their ground. But the Zendari were no fools. They quickly regrouped and brought their full force to bear against the 2 allied fleets. The battle raged on, with both sides pushing to the breaking point. The sound of energy blasts and explosions filled the air as the 2 forces clashed in the cold expanse of space. Then, just as hope seemed to be slipping away, the Zendari flagship appeared. It was massive, more powerful than any ship in their fleet, and it moved with the kind of grace and precision only a flagship could possess. Its appearance was a clear signal. It was time for the Zendari to end this fight once and for all. "Captain, the Zendari flagship has entered the battle," Holt said, his voice sharp with alarm. "They're aiming straight for Fortress Haven." Voss's eyes narrowed as he watched the massive ship move into position. "They're going to try and destroy Haven. We can't let that happen." He quickly issued orders to his fleet. "All ships, focus on the flagship. We need to disable it before it can fire on Haven." The human fleet surged forward with renewed energy. They couldn't afford to let the Zendari destroy the home they had fought so hard to protect. The Resolute and its allies raced toward the flagship, their weapons charged and ready. The time for defense was over. Now, it was time to strike. The Zendari flagship, a massive warship with dark, jagged edges, loomed ahead. Its presence sent a wave of unease through Captain Elias Voss, who stood at the helm of the Resolute. The flagship was the heart of the Zendari fleet, and its destruction was essential to ending the war. Voss knew that if they didn't act fast, they would lose everything they had fought for. "Captain, we've identified their primary weapon system," Lieutenant Rivera announced, her voice tense. "It's charged and ready. If it fires on Haven, the entire base will be wiped out." Voss nodded grimly. "We won't let that happen. All ships, focus on the flagship. We need to disable it before they get a chance to fire." The human fleet had been fighting with all its strength, but the appearance of the Zendari flagship changed the balance of the battle. It was far more powerful than anything they had encountered before, and the pressure of the fight was starting to show. Still, the humans didn't waver. They were determined to win. Meanwhile, Selen stood at the command center of her Vezari ship. She had come a long way from the timid diplomat she once was. Now she was ready to fight, not just to protect her people, but to defend the humans who had given them sanctuary. "Prepare the weapons," Selen ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We're not backing down. Let's show them what we can do." Her crew moved quickly, their efficiency growing with each passing moment. The Vezari ships had started to work in perfect coordination with the humans, taking the fight to the Zendari with a precision that shocked even the Zendari commanders. The Vezari, once hesitant, were now battle-hardened warriors, each ship moving with purpose and power. On the Resolute, Voss felt a spark of hope. The Vezari had been invaluable allies. Their ships, though not as advanced as the Zendaris, had turned the tide in key moments. Their determination was unmatched, and Voss could see that they were ready to make a stand. "Let's push them back," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "We've got one chance to take down their flagship. All ships, concentrate fire on the flagship's weak points." The fleet moved as one, focusing all their energy on the Zendari flagship. The first volley of fire from the human ships hit their target. The Resolute fired a well-placed shot that exploded against the flagship's side, sending sparks flying. But the Zendari flagship was built to withstand punishment, and the damage was minimal. It was clear that they needed to do more than just chip away at the hull. "Captain, they're preparing to fire," Rivera said urgently, her eyes fixed on the screens. "We need to stop them now, or we'll lose everything." Voss gritted his teeth. Time was running out. The flagship's weapon was nearly fully charged, and they could already see the energy building in the center of the massive warship. "Focus on the main weapon," Voss commanded. "We take that out, and the rest of the ship will fall." The human ships surged forward, weaving through the chaos of the battle. The Zendari flagship fired a barrage of energy beams, tearing through the air and causing massive explosions in the asteroid field. But the humans were quick, their ships nimble and unpredictable. They darted between the asteroid clusters, dodging the enemy's attacks while returning fire. Selen's Vezari ships were right behind them, providing critical support. Their smaller, faster ships darted in and out of the battlefield, drawing the Zendari's fire and allowing the humans to get closer to their target. The coordinated attacks were beginning to have an effect, as the Zendari flagship started to show signs of weakness. "Keep pushing," Voss shouted over the comms, his voice full of determination. "We're almost there." In a final desperate move, the Zendari flagship released a powerful energy beam toward Fortress Haven, its weapon fully charged and aimed at the heart of the base. The beam tore through space, moving faster than any ship could react. But at the last possible moment, a human ship, the Vanguard, led by Commander Holt, intercepted the shot. The Vanguard used its shield to block the beam, absorbing the full force of the energy. The ship shook violently under the strain, but Holt's crew managed to hold the shield long enough to redirect the blast into space, saving Haven. "We did it," Holt's voice came through the comms, a note of triumph in his tone. "The shot's been deflected." Voss felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew this was only a temporary victory. They still had to defeat the flagship. "Now all ships target the flagship's power core," Voss ordered. "This is our chance. Take them down." The remaining human and Vezari ships closed in on the Zendari flagship. The Resolute took the lead, its weapons firing with precision. The Vanguard followed closely behind, engaging the flagship's defensive systems while the smaller Vasari ships darted in, hitting the weak points with pinpoint accuracy. For a moment, it seemed like the Zendari might fight back with one last desperate blow. But then, with a final powerful strike, the Resolute hit the flagship's power core. The ship's entire structure shuddered violently as explosions erupted throughout its hull. A bright flash of light illuminated the battlefield, and the flagship went silent. The Zendari fleet, without their flagship to lead them, faltered. The remaining ships, disorganized and without direction, began to retreat. "We did it. The flagship is down," Rivera shouted, her voice full of disbelief and joy. Voss allowed himself a rare smile. It wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was done. The Zendari fleet was retreating, and Fortress Haven was safe for now. The humans and Vasari had fought together, and together they had won a victory that would go down in history. But Voss knew this was just the beginning. The Zendari were not easily defeated, and the galaxy had many more challenges in store. But for now, humanity had proven that no matter the odds, they would fight, and they would protect their allies until the very end. The battle was over, but the war had left scars. As the last remnants of the Zendari fleet fled, the humans and Vasari ships lingered in the silent void, their crews exhausted but victorious. The fight for survival had been hard, but they had won, against the odds, against the impossible. And now, as the stars blinked quietly above them, they could finally catch their breath. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out at the dark expanse of space. The shattered remains of the Zendari flagship drifted in the distance, a reminder of the ferocity of the battle they had just won. He had seen many conflicts in his time, but this one felt different. "We did it," Lieutenant Rivera said softly, standing beside him. "Against all odds, we pulled through." Voss nodded. He had lost friends, many good people who had fought alongside him. Their sacrifice weighed heavily on his heart, but he knew their efforts had saved countless others. Their victory wasn't just a military achievement. It was a symbol of something more, something greater. "Yes, we did," Voss replied, his voice steady. "But it's not over. The galaxy is still in chaos, and the Zendari may come back. We need to be ready." Rivera glanced over at him, her expression serious. "We will be, Captain. And this time, we won't be alone." The Vasari fleet, now fully integrated with the humans, had proven to be a powerful ally. They had fought with honor, and their loyalty to humanity had been tested and proven in the heat of battle. The alliance between the two races had been fragile at first, born from necessity and mutual respect. But now it was something more. It was a bond forged in fire, one that could withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. At the heart of the Vasari fleet, Selen stood in her command center, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her. The battle was over, but her mind raced with thoughts of the future. Her people had found something they hadn't had in a long time. Hope. Hope that they could stand beside the humans and build a future together. It was a new beginning, and Selen was ready to embrace it. "Selen," a voice called over the comm. It was her first officer, Taven. "The humans are requesting a meeting. They want to discuss the next steps." Selen smiled slightly. The humans were always looking ahead, always thinking about the next step. It was one of the things she admired most about them. "Let's meet with them," she replied. "We have much to discuss." The two fleets, human and Vasari, met in the neutral zone near the remains of the Zendari flagship. The space was quiet now, the sounds of battle replaced by the hum of engines and the distant glow of stars. The leaders of the two races gathered in a conference room aboard the Resolute, ready to discuss the future. Captain Voss, Commander Holt, and Lieutenant Rivera stood with Selen, Taven, and several other Vasari representatives. The room was filled with a sense of cautious optimism. The war was over, but they knew the galaxy was still full of challenges. There would be rebuilding to do, alliances to strengthen, and new enemies to face. "We've won," Voss began, his voice calm but firm. But there's a lot of work ahead of us. The Zendari are not gone, and there are other threats out there. It's time for us to come together, not just as allies, but as partners. We must rebuild the galaxy, and we must do it together. Selen nodded, her gaze steady. I agree. My people are ready to help. Together, we have the strength to create a new future, a future where no one is abandoned, no one is left to suffer. Voss looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the Veseri leaders. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The alliance between humans and Vesari was no longer just a military pact. It was something deeper, a shared vision for the future. We will work together, Voss said, his voice resolute, for the good of both our people and for the good of the galaxy. The meeting continued for hours, discussing plans for rebuilding the worlds affected by the war, establishing new trade routes, and creating an alliance that could stand against any force that threatened peace. It was clear that this was the beginning of something monumental. Humanity and the Vesari were no longer just allies. They were partners in a shared future. Back on Fortress Haven, the survivors of the war began to rebuild. The station, once a symbol of vulnerability, now stood as a beacon of hope. The people on Haven knew that they had survived because they had chosen to fight, because they had chosen to protect each other. And now, with the humans and Vesari united, they would rebuild what had been lost. In the days that followed, Captain Voss and Selen worked side by side, leading their people through the next phase of their journey. The stars had witnessed their struggle, their victory, and now they would bear witness to their growth. A new era was beginning, one where humans and Vesari would stand together, stronger than ever before. And though there would always be challenges ahead, one thing was certain: the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. No one, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed, would be abandoned again. As Captain Voss stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the stars drift by, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt full of possibility. Humanity had chosen to protect those in need, and in doing so, had not only saved alien races, but had forged bonds that would endure for generations. They had shown the galaxy that they were a force for good, and together with their new allies, they would build a future worth fighting for. The galaxy was at peace, for now.